Unspoken Issues.
Hey everyone, we are proud to be a part of the W2M network and wanted to take a quick moment to give you an update regarding the W2M network feed. If you've subscribed to the source material comics feed, nothing will change. However, due to some new policies by Spreaker, if you listen to us on the W2M Net podcast feed, along with all of the other great W2M Net shows, that feed will soon cease to exist. Shows like the Rattleitch Broadcasting Network, Video Games to the Max, Talk the Keki, and others in the description of this episode will still have their own dedicated feeds, so punch in their name in your podcatcher and subscribe. All right, on with the show. Let's go ahead. We'll get started here. We got Sandman Mystery Theatre. Am I going to say it like that the whole time?
Well, you need like a big leather armchair and a robe. It's like really a pipe.
So you're the pipe.
You need to be the Cookie Monster. Also could help.
I got the pipe.
This is a Vertigo title. It's a cover dated April of 93, dropped on the shelves February 9th of 1993, according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics. And this is a book that passed me by. I knew about it, but I never read anything of Sandman Mystery Theatre at all. To talk about it this evening, got some great guests, people who suggested it to me.
Where are they? Are they going to make us leave?
We don't know them.
Dean Compton, it's Sandman Mystery Theatre, man. I mean, look, was this sitting behind your issues of Cyberforce? I assume you got.
No. You're the Cyberforce guy. You're the Cyberforce guy. I like Cyber. Were they sitting behind them? No, but I remember stealing Sandman Mystery Theater #1 from a convention. I was like really ballsy, man. Like fucking took it out of like a long box and just put it in my bag like a champ. I really shouldn't have done that. I remember when this came out, I'm a Justice Society of America mark. And in my first pack of DC Cosmic cards, their first card line from Impel, which I think would have been 91, maybe 92. There was a card that was like All-Star Comics #6. Had the cover of it on the back. It's the Justice Society. I'd never seen the Golden Age Sandman or the Golden Age Flash or the Golden Age Hawkman, but pretty obvious who those three guys are, I mean, he's got the ring and he's got a lantern on his chest, Flash, red, the great hat, the great helmet.
The worst hat.
Incredible helmet. Lightning bolt. He's the Flash and Hawkman with the wings and everything.
There's opinions there.
Through process of elimination, I figured out who Sandman was. I just loved the Golden Age heroes, Justice Society. I'm an ardent anti-fascist now, and I guess there was always a huge part of me that was then because I was obsessed with beating the Nazis. World War II, you could buy All-Star Squadron for $1 at the flea market, and a lot of these guys were in it, and so I got into comic books right when Vertigo was starting to become a thing, and this is one of their first titles that aren't the titles that they bring from DC into Vertigo. Swamp Thing, Animal Man, Shade the Changing Man, Sandman, Constantine, Hellblazer. So this is one of their first launches, and so I was interested in it for that reason. But then I was like, oh, it's the Golden Age Sandman, the guy from the card, the guy from the the Justice Society. So, like I said, I pick this up every now and then. Not regularly, but I always liked it. I really like the idea of it. And what a brilliant way to spin off Sandman in a way that won't require Neil Gaiman or anybody involved with that. But you can have that tenuous connection, a little prestige off the name. So, no, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I always tried to pick it up. And I've never read it straight through. I really should sometime. But I've read some arcs here and there. And the first one, when we're talking about today, Tarantula, is a really, really good way to get into the story.
The book, like I said, kind of passed me by, but Emily Scott's here. Emily, is this a book that you were reading back in the day?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Okay.
Emily didn't learn to read until 1996.
Wow.
Dean taught me. No, I am the exact person who probably should have been reading Neil Gaiman's Sandman in high school, but my nerd exposure was very different, I think, than Dean's. And so comic books in general were not something I read a lot of in the 90s, except X-Men comics specifically.
Okay.
I had a lot of those. And I've read Neil Gaiman's Sandman since then and been like, oh, this is absolutely what I should have been reading while it was coming out. And so for me, this particular, Sandman character was something that was only ever I was only ever peripherally aware of it because it would be something that, like, if I would talk to a comic book fan, they'd be like, "Oh, there's actually another version of the Sandman. Or,
There's a
that's
bunch of
awesome, blah, blah,"
Sandmans.
There is.
But if me as a lady who's telling you I'm not super into comic books or knowledgeable about it, that's like the fact that would get pulled out. Oh, there's actually
Right.
another Sandman, and I'm sure some of them didn't know half as much as Dean with his very encyclopedic knowledge of. How many Sandmans are there?
Bloody hell. So there's Wesley Dodds. There's the Jack Kirby, Joe Simon Sandman. Hector Hall becomes the Sandman for a little bit. Then there's Dream, and there's Daniel. There's Marvel Sandman. I could be leaving one out.
Okay.
There's also Sandman Superman, which isn't really a Sandman, but it's
Yeah, none of these people were going to be busting out all of that information in the context of these conversations. These were very sort of like man-splitting, like, let me tell you all about Neil Gaiman, like this was not the place to find out about, I forget all the names you just said, but those guys.
So which one of you guys was the one that suggested this one? Because obviously it wasn't me, so I didn't know if was you, Dean, or was it? Okay. All right.
It was too, you wouldn't have suggested it. Too busy looking for that Cyberforce run.
Yeah.
We are going to do Cyberforce 0 through 4 in the future, everyone. Just it's on the schedule.
I can't wait. I'll have like a drink and everything. I'll be drinking that. It'll be crazy.
I do believe it was a suggestion made on my behalf because I had suggested something maybe a little more gothic.
Oh, okay. That fits the bill.
Emily was like, hey, can we do something, gothic? And I don't know that this quite counts, but it's certainly in that direction.
Yeah.
I'll give it a pass. I would absolutely, yeah.
A lot of dead bodies, a lot of sordid behavior, a lot of a really dark and grimy story that has a lot of shining characters, which is a very interesting dichotomous juxtaposition.
So this is written by Matt Wagner. I hopped onto Mike's Amazing World just to kind of look at the quick history, kind of leading our way up here to 1993. So
with Matt Wagner, we're going to talk about anything he's done. The conversation is going to start and end with Grindel.
Exactly. Yeah, it starts in the early 80s. Grindel shows up in Primer number 2 from Comico and stays with Comico until late 1990, where he starts doing Grindel and Mage, and then dabbling in DC, doing the 4-issue Demon series in 86 and through 87. Yep. Grindel ends for Comico in February of 1990, and a few months later, he picks up more work for Dark Horse in DC, writing one lone Malibu title called Tarzan, Love, Lies, and the Lost City in August of 1992. While these 4 issues of Sandman were being published, he also continued to tell Grindel stories in Grindel War Child at Dark Horse. So as we're reading these first 4 issues of Sandman, that's happening as well.
And this is right after or right at the same time as the Batman Grindel crossover.
Oh, is it really? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Which was like a thing that had been in the works for like years. Comico's later history is like really, really, really uneven.
Oh, yeah.
And so like there's shady deals. Andrew Reb, the guy who owns Youngblood now, like he buys Comico towards the end, and he's at least 7 degrees shy of a full thermometer. You know what I mean? Like he can't, there's something off with that guy. And like, he makes a bunch of promises he can't keep and doesn't pay people. And the Batman Grindel crossover is like under Comico. And I think that's the last time Wagner does anything in regard to Grindel and Comico. So,
okay. Wow.
So yeah, he's going his own way. He's taking his characters, Grindel. He'll bring Mage over from Comico to like Image Comics later in the 90s, so one of the greatest creators of all time, honestly. Certainly, you're talking independent 80s guys, got to be top 5, top 10, really, really smart guy who's done everything his own way. I have a lot of respect for Matt Wagner. Also, he's my Facebook friend, so if you see this and you listen, I appreciate you for that, brother.
Shout out to you. Guy Davis, the artist for this. Name I didn't recognize, but give you a little bit of history. In 89, Guy Davis is the writer/artist for a story called The Great Marsh, and Dark Horse Presents number 36. 4 years pass, and no other work is detailed on Mike's Amazing World of Comics. And then the next entry is these 4 issues.
Guy Davis because I knew he had done something awesome. He did Baker Street for Caliber Press before this, and it was like very critically acclaimed, and that's what got him this gig. And then later he'd work on BRPD and stuff like that. Done a lot of stuff in movies, storyboarding, and that kind of thing.
Okay, all right.
Criterion artwork and Mondo stuff.
Nice, very nice. Colored by David Hornung. There we go. I found it. I could not read what I wrote, and that's indicative of me as I get older, apparently.
This is the story of my entire life. I'm looking at my own notes right now, and
so let's run down the characters here and what this is about. So again, like you said, Dean, this is Tarantula. We got 4 acts going throughout these 4 issues. The setting is New York, 1938. Prohibition has just ended. Our first person we're going to talk about is Wesley Dodds.
He's the guy in the Justice Society everybody likes. Everybody likes Wesley Dodds. He's somebody everybody feels like they can confide in. Everybody can talk to him, and he's just kind of like that likable brother.
My description here in this book, he's a businessman who midnights as the vigilante detective, the Sandman, and he has weapons, specifically a gun that dispenses gas that knocks people out.
Right. And he makes different gas to do different things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like he could also use a truth serum type thing and like that kind of stuff. He's a creepy motherfucker.
Right.
And that's why we like him.
Right.
I also want to point out that this is retconned later, but in Sandman Midnight Theater, it is established he has a connection with Dream. At this point, Dream is like captured in England, and he actually has like an encounter like on the grounds where Dream is captured, and that winds up, and that's why he has prophetic dream. That's why he goes after the tarantula. You see his dreams in this that is actually influenced by the Neil Gaiman dream stuff, which is again a nice tenuous connection. But he had to do this because there was no Sandman, and this was like, to me, it's seen as like a feeble mortal attempt to fill that role in a way. I really like it. I enjoy that part. I enjoy a good retcon, and I feel like that's a good one. Obviously, when Wesley Dodds was created in 1938, they weren't like, well, Neil Gaiman will show up and redo this one day. And if they were, why were they in comic books? They had other things to prognosticate to get rich on.
Please, right. So then we have Larry Belmont, the district attorney for the city of New York. Diane Belmont, Larry's social butterfly of a daughter who enjoys mingling with her friends in the New York nightlife. Daddy. Catherine Vandermeer, Diane's close friend. Then we have Albert Goldman, a criminal underworld boss who shows up in here, and his family. Miriam Goldman, who is the alcoholic wife to Albert. Celia Goldman.
His bloodless spouse.
Oh, yes. She looks so pale and white in this book.
My note was she looks like Voldemort in drag when you see her.
Yeah, she is frightening. Then we have Celia Goldman, Albert's daughter, who we learn has been sexually abused by her father at one point. Roger Goldman, Albert's son, who seems to catch the ire of his father more often than not. And then we have the Tarantula, the mysterious Tarantula, a criminal who is terrorizing the city that is abducting and killing unsuspecting women. So all the elements for a great crime noir tale right here in Sandman Mystery Theatre.
I have a question that I had not really thought to look into until we were talking about this. So this is 1993 when this starts. So Neil Gaiman's Sandman already would have been going for, about 4 years at that point?
Yeah, about 5 years. I think it starts in 88.
Is that part of why there was another title for this character?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is right after, I think I mentioned this earlier, this is right after Vertigo is established as a line. When Sandman starts, when Animal Man, Doom Patrol, Shade the Changing Man, Swamp Thing, they're DC comics. They just have the DC logo. And sort of cross over with the DC universe. Vertigo becomes the imprint where you're going to find them. It's an imprint of DC. And this is one of Vertigo's first non-launch titles. I think another early one would have been Enigma and Black Orchid. And again, you can kind of trace this all back to Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, where, you kind of got that British feel.
Enigma
twisted
is
tales of dark fantasy. They're obviously trying to make some money on the acclaim and the clout that Gaiman's Sandman has, but you can't just be like, oh, well, here's Sandman Mystery Nights or what the fuck ever. It's not going to work. And they've been very, DC historically, and at that time especially, has been very like giving to Neil Gaiman, especially for characters that aren't his. They work for higher characters. And so if he doesn't really want anything to happen, especially then with these characters, it wasn't gonna. He wanted to quit doing Sandman. Sandman's not gonna last maybe another about 2 years, maybe 3, 2.5. I can't remember. It ends around 75. So they want to keep that name going, and they want to make some money off of it until he decides that he's going to play in the sandbox again, or let somebody else do it, which will happen later in the 90s with House of Mystery, The Dreaming, Lucifer in the year 2000, etc. So for sure, yeah, they were trying to spin off the Sandman, knowing that they could not really spin off Sandman. And if you ask me, it's a brilliant way to do it.
Little shout out for Enigma too, which is also super weird, and I wrote about it on the Unspoken Decade, so I'm gonna pitch my own article here.
The other thing I was gonna say is, if you don't pick up on this is supposed to sound and seem very much like a story being told at the time that the events are happening. Sounds the name of the book, Sandman Mystery Theater, divided into these acts. I feel like it's supposed to evoke a radio serial feel.
Okay.
This is supposed to feel a lot like you were listening to The Shadow or The Green Hornet or something like that. Gonna solve the mystery in Act 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I think that's a neat aspect to it as well. This is in a good way, an incredible love letter to this part of American history and New York history in particular. And before we get into it, I think that's something that, even people who might not, like, I'm not really into any kind of superhero stuff, or not really into I don't know, the Vertigo stuff's, a little wah for me. If you like New York period stuff, I think this is a really good book for you to take a look at.
Yeah, having not been alive in the 30s to verify this is true, it definitely seems to evoke that feeling, that vibe incredibly well.
Yeah.
And I definitely heard some like jazzy saxophone incidental music in my head as I was reading it.
Right.
As though it was
Glenn Miller.
a radio play. And a lot of the characters in this comic book have faces for radio, so it's also very appropriate.
Ouch,
true.
Shots fired.
True.
It's very successful. It runs 70 issues. It has an annual. It wraps up in, I think, like early 99, maybe 98. So you couldn't have got much more out of this than they got. So, you got to give them credit. They were able to take something that you read Neil Gaiman's Sandman, you're like, how do we spin this off without his permission, without making him mad? Wow, they perfected it. They got the money, they got the critical acclaim, and they got the longevity. And they made a character who really probably not very relevant for a while, relevant for a whole new age.
Yeah, I'll agree. Social butterfly Diane Belmont is trying to enjoy her 20s with her companions, but when her close friend Catherine Vandermeer is kidnapped, she feels compelled to assist in the investigation to find her. Her father, District Attorney Larry Belmont, would rather she remain uninvolved, keeping herself away from the horrors of the criminal investigation and reducing the potential of her becoming a victim as well. Diane has also become friends with Wesley Dodds, who has just returned to New York after inheriting his father's business, finding him more interesting than other men she has previously met. When more women become missing, one of which turns up dead, the police are scrambling to find clues. Also, there is a mysterious person calling himself the Sandman that seems to be investigating those tied to the crime as well, leaving ornate origami notes after spraying them with a gun that emits knockout gas. By the end of issue 2, the Tarantula is struck again, abducting another woman. However, we see that Diane's friend, Catherine, is still alive, and the Tarantula plans to torture this other woman in front of Catherine in order to get her to disclose some information about someone she knows. So there's a lot of mystery here. We're trying to put the pieces together. They're not all fitting just yet, but we can see we got the bad guys out there taking these women. Why are they doing this? We don't know. Wesley Dodds is on the case, doing the investigation, trying to put together these clues.
If you really want to sum up the vibe of the series in one shot, it is the last page of issue 1. That's where she goes into the bathroom and the Sandman is there looking creepy as hell. Emily and I were talking about it, and she's like, yeah, this is the scary guy that you're worried you're going to run into.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to open up a dark room and oh shit, there's a guy in a trench coat and a gas mask and a hat. And let me make it clear. Wesley Dodds as the Sandman is always wearing his hat and his tie. He dresses for success in that respect.
Yes, he does.
You know what I mean? He understands. It's not just what you do. You need to look good doing it. You're representing more than just you. You're representing the idea of a Sandman.
What I like about this story with the Sandman and these first two issues, I mean, if you're just picking this up off the shelf, you're kind of like, is the Sandman a good guy or is he a bad guy? You don't really know for sure if he is or not.
It's hard to believe that there's a lot of blind pickups of this title. It's also impossible to believe that there were none. Because, like, you got to remember, you know, we mentioned this on the Angela podcast that we recorded yesterday. Check out the archives for that, everybody. We had a blast. This is a time when Sarah Gilbert is wearing, like, Neil Gaiman Sandman shirts on Roseanne. Raven's going to be wearing, like, Sandman and Inhumans shirts on wrestling 2 years after this in ECW and then later in WCW. I would assume that, like, most of the people who picked this up had, like, knew something about it beforehand. But I'm equally sure that, like, somebody saw Sarah Gilbert and the guy who would later be on The Big Bang Theory, but who I always think, no matter what, that guy, I'm like, oh, that's David.
David.
Look at
His
David.
name is Johnny
When did
Galecki.
David get his physics degree? Good for him. Good for him. Good for you, David. Anyhow, I'm sure
that, but they were trying to write a comic he and Darlene.
Right. This that was like a subplot for at least a year, maybe two. And they had all this
to like art school. It was like for a few years.
Yeah. And they had all this DC stuff around too. They had Death Superman posters and that kind of thing. So I'm sure that it's possible that somebody was watching that and was like, oh, I saw that shirt. Say you go to the comic book store and you don't know shit from apple butter about it. You saw this on TV and you're like, or you saw Raven with the shirt. You might have picked up Sandman Mystery Theater thinking that's what the shirt was.
Like, what the hell?
right. You know, but like, I think most people pick this up. They would have read Wizard Magazine or even the Vertigo announcements in other books and know, and even a lot of old school fans would just know it was Wesley Dodds. This wasn't sold on newsstand. So, you know, I mean, Vertigo is a direct market only imprint. So I don't know. Obviously, it happened both ways, but I would assume 75% at least of these readers knew who Sandman was.
Okay.
Well, we should talk about the covers too, though, because
I was gonna.
A lot of these. Too busy talking about Roseanne and Darlene. Talking about the comic book.
Sarah Gilbert should stop being so hot.
Aw, sweetie, you're barking up the wrong tree.
You go on though. You're right. The covers are striking and different.
Yeah, they definitely
are. All of those Dark Horse, like all those photo covers for not just Sandman. Like there's a bunch of different titles it uses, right? Like that photo style.
I mean, there are some, but like this book will use it all the way through its run. Like this will pretty much be photo. I mean, I think there's a few exceptions, but it is a photo cover book in a world where literally 99.2% of comic books are drawn covers, drawn or painted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One of the things I like about, and also too with like Neil Gaiman Sandman, like that collage sort of look where it's like the photo and art and text and blurry stuff you can't quite make out what it is.
Right.
The layered texture of it is usually really interesting. And I could see that. I don't remember seeing these in a comic book store in the 90s, but I can see that being really eye-catching because it just looks so different from everything else.
I like the prose, the poetry on the cover that like doesn't really appear in there, where you have somebody be like, she wet her hot lips, and like really giving it that pulp radio feel that just like it's just seeping melodrama in the best possible way.
But it's a great way to make something from a very certain era seem very relevant again.
Yeah, I mean, also, like, you're talking about the photo covers. I mean, that's a great thing because I remember seeing it in the comic book store, and it stands out. It would stand out. And like you said, there's blurry stuff. You don't quite know what's going on. And that's the Vertigo feel, baby. That's if you read like the first editorial from Karen Berger, when like they're fucking starting Vertigo, where they're changing them from those DC titles to Animal, they're like, we want, to paraphrase, she's like, we want to make your head spin in a good way. Like, that's why we're Vertigo. It's not right. It's a little askew. It's a little different take. You're not going to, there's not going to be a lot of capes around here saving the day, but there are going to be a lot of questions, and there are probably going to be fewer answers.
the way that some of these characters come across is pretty interesting. We'll talk about Diane, who, this is written in the early 90s, but this is supposed to be the late 30s. And
38. It's almost real time because like he first appears in like 38.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
She's definitely, she's a strong female character in this. Even though her daddy wants her to stay home, she's not going to be doing that. She's a woman coming into her own, but she's got this, she's got to avoid all this danger that's going on around her, this immediate danger. She's trying to make her father understand throughout this book that she's a woman now. She's able to make her own decisions. She's able to take care of herself. It's a nice little added element to this book.
I think sometimes like strong female character can be such a loaded phrase that can be used pejoratively too. That's like, oh, this is you wrote an idea rather than a character. And I think that she does not come across that way. I don't know. There were certain things where I was actually kind of surprised a woman didn't write it. And I mean that in a complimentary way. Mm-hmm. Like, from the first time we see her and her dad says something about, oh, you girls, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, shouldn't that be women, daddy? Because that's...
She's like, the youngest of us is 25.
Right. This is like a guy in the 90s writing a woman in the 30s about something that my mother in the 80s would complain about. Like, and my mother is not somebody, she would never describe herself as a feminist, and she would never be confused with a feminist, I don't think, for the most part. But there were certain things like that would just really set her off, and that was one of them. She would complain endlessly if she heard, say, a group of 50-year-old men call a group of 70-year-old women, oh, you girls. It would drive her nuts. And so I thought about her when I read that line, because I was like, oh, a woman has told the writer of this that bothers it. Like a woman's told him, like, you shouldn't do this. And I thought, I don't know, I really appreciated those moments she has like that, where she's just, I don't know, there's something about women from that time, like the 20s and 30s, where like, like the brassy broads.
Yeah.
I thought she was a really great example of that kind of like brassy broad who like you'd want to go out to the club with this lady. Like you'd want to stay out and drink it and like,
oh yeah.
I don't know, doing whatever post-prohibition women do in the 30s. I know they're not flappers at that point. I don't know what to call them.
They're hitting the club, that's for sure, and mixing with the social scene.
Real name dropping too. Those are really people like when they were talking about that you could have possibly seen in these like nightclubs at the time. And like, prohibition's only been over a few years. This is exactly the kind of person who would have been frequenting those clubs.
Joe DiMaggio.
Oh, Joe DiMaggio, man. I'm a big baseball guy. It's the best thing in the world. Outside of people, the people I love are better, but baseball, it's the best. I like baseball more than I like comic books.
All right.
And you all know how much I love comic books.
Oh, yeah.
I remember Emily's sister once asked me, she's like, what do you like better, The Punisher or baseball? And I was like, it's baseball, and it's not nearly as close as you think.
Baseball is the metric he used to let me know how much he liked me.
Nice.
More than baseball.
Wow.
No higher compliment given.
No.
Jesse, I like you more than slow pitch softball, but other ball and bat sports, you're going to have to work a little bit. No,
I was going to say, I wonder what effort I have to put in order to make my way up. I don't know what else I could do.
You're great, obviously. I'm just messing. But yeah, it was cool to see Joe DiMaggio there as a guy who would have been there. Most likely would have been there at night, which is fun because most games were still played during the day. And Wesley Dodds not impressed. That's fine. He's one of those sports ball people. He doesn't get it. He doesn't have to. I get why he's not super into it, but like, man, Joltin' Joe, I was excited to see him. 56 game hitting streak, y'all. Ain't nobody really ever got close since then.
Oh, wow.
I just I don't know, whoever wrote this definitely did the research or just knows a lot about this time period. I liked when the two women are talking and one of them like basically is like talking about who's in the club and like calls one of the women there like, oh, there's Meyer Lansky over there. They're like, oh, you're so bad,
Yeah,
I love these ladies.
Getting that
this book go out with ladies.
Getting that social upper crust kind of feel for the late 30s New York. What they captured it. I think. I mean, it definitely has that feel to it where it's there's a party going on, but there's probably some seedier stuff that's happening underneath all this.
It's also important. They do this very well. without hitting you over the head with it, the subtext of their privilege. This is a wealthy, connected white lady who lives in New York City who's going to Harlem to have herself a good time. Which at the time would have been predominantly African American people. The depression is going on. There's lots of poor people around. There's lots of poverty. And like, you can feel that on the edges without them like telling you that, like, yeah, she can tell her dad to call her a woman. I don't know. There's a lot of ladies in Ohio or Oklahoma who couldn't get away with that at this time.
Right.
You know, and
right.
you like I said, they're not beating you over again, it's just this nice subtext to remind you of that. Similar to the way they foreshadow a lot of things that you'll see in issues 3 and 4 without actually saying them. But, you know, as Emily was reading, she's like, wait, is this thing going with this thing? And I'm like, do you want me to tell you or do you want to just read it? And she chose to read it. So, but I enjoy both of those things. Great foreshadowing, great subtext.
Well, it is an interesting time in American history, just because you do have, like, you know, like they're going to the Algonquin and they're name dropping all these like literary people that he goes just to like be around, just to kind of absorb some of that creative energy with all these different literary figures. And like, there is a sort of like intellectual renaissance in New York at this time, both like the Harlem Renaissance and also, you know, in that other like literary circles. And I thought they incorporated all of that into it very well. And, you know, we think about like things happen, like we think about progress as happening in a linear way, in a way that it doesn't actually. And there were a lot of strides made in feminism during, like, you know, from like the early 20th century on through.
Especially from 1920.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially from the constitutional right to vote on, things go fast. Ladies start smoking cigarettes, and that sounds funny, but that was a big deal.
And I was thinking about that. At one point, a character complains that you can't smoke cigars on planes anymore. You can only smoke cigarettes.
You're right.
And I was wondering if, like, is that part of him being upset because, like, oh, now women can do something I can't. But I thought that they got a lot of that stuff in there. They slid it in a way that just added to the atmosphere rather than having to, like, tell you a lot of these things.
What's interesting about the whole cigarette comment that you're talking about there, and this is the early to mid 90s. And they're starting to kind of like buckle down on the whole cigarette thing too. At this point, now I remember I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken for up to like 99, 90, but I know for a fact in 97 we still had the little tin ashtrays out there on the
yes sir.
Oh, 100%. I started working at Wendy's in 99. We 100% had those little ashtrays.
I started working at Hardee's in 97. I was there till 99. We had a smoking section the whole time.
So I'm curious if he was. I mean, this is 93, so I don't know if the movement to stop secondhand smoke was going on. I would imagine if anything, it's in its nascent point where it's starting.
I remember there were laws starting to be passed in Arkansas that were like you couldn't smoke in like a government building anymore, and there was like uproar from people. People were like, I did not spend my Marlboro miles on your taxes for this. So there was genuinely though an uproar, and it would eventually spread, from there. But that's where it started, Arkansas, around 93, 94, around there.
I'm in New York City in 2001 because of September of 2001 because I have great timing. And I think I only lived there about 6 months before the smoking ban went into effect there. It was like early 2002 where they banned it in bar. And that was a huge deal.
Yeah, that's big.
No bars and no restaurants. And because, people were like, it's a fucking bar. You're telling me I can't smoke in a bar? What the and a crazy notion to, so many people. And I think anybody under the age of 30 listening to this is going to be like, what are you talking about?
Now you have to find a bar that will let you.
If there are any youths out there who have never experienced, the smoking sections in restaurants just used to be a different part of the restaurant.
It's not like, there
wasn't even a wall. It was just a different part of the restaurant.
Yeah.
I remember we had a divider that had planters in it. It had fake plants or whatever. And one side of it was smoking and one side wasn't. But there were the booths, were what the fuck? But you're not
right over it. The Goldmans get introduced, I think, in these first first two issues, especially the first issue where we get to see definitely a very dysfunctional family. Gets a little uncomfortable.
Hard to believe this ruthless mobster was unable to provide a solid family foundation for his daughter and wife and son.
I legitimately, I mean, they draw them in a almost grotesque way. Like, I mean,
they really do. Guy Davis does a great job with that.
I legitimately thought when we first see Miriam that there was something like wrong with her. Like, not just, oh, she's an alcoholic, or like maybe that she was almost like a super like she's like white.
Yeah, she's white. Her skin looks like it's almost kind of sagging off of her a little bit, and
hair of whiter shade of pale.
It just isn't good. The son, you see the son in the first issue. He's just kind of like sitting alone in a room in the dark.
Weirdo ass, like that guy from Sin City shit, just sitting around in the fucking dark. What the fuck's going on here? What are you doing?
Like
Goddamn weirdo, get the fuck out of here.
Dad and his associates walk in, and he's like, "Sorry, Dad." And he just kind of gets up and leaves. And yeah, he's.
I'm gonna go drink in the dark room somewhere else.
We live in a mansion. That's the thing, like, bro, if you want to drink in the dark, like, you live here, you have a room.
Right, dude.
I'm not against you drinking in the dark. That's not what makes you a weirdo. What makes you a weirdo is doing it in a spot where somebody could, like, happen upon you, like, for no reason. Like, there's something wrong with you. Go drink in the dark like a good person does. Your own room, your space.
So we end up seeing, I mean, what do you think of the tarantula? I'll ask you here, Emily, the tarantula. I'm staring at the screen right now where the tarantula who first shows up, hooded character, got, it's a very, very, very scary looking guy who's taking these women and chaining them up and actually killing a couple of them. What are your thoughts of the villain here?
He is definitely drawn very, very creepy. There's also his associate that we aren't told a lot about for much of the book, who's just like a woman under like a lacy veil of some kind. And like, again, like the art does not shy away from just depicting them as like grotesque or shying away from depicting things in a very ugly fashion. Like when we see Catherine, we see her face all beaten up, and like they do not shy away from drawing it like very like ugly looking, like very like, like this is, even like I think one of the first panels in the book altogether is a dream the Sandman is having, and he's dreaming about like the woman in the veil, and he's got like, and it devolves into like this body sculpture a la like the show Hannibal, where it's just like from page one, you're like, this is like horror. There is like bad stuff going on, and we are not going to rosy it up at all. And the color palette is like super muted, which makes it somehow more grotesque than if it's like really bright and garish. And so I think you immediately get the like unhingedness of this character, and even if you don't necessarily get a lot of specific information, like the presence, it's palpable. It's also interesting too that you get like, especially once you read more and you're like, and you start to figure out who it is. I think most people are going to figure out who these characters are before you get to the end, but like
not me. Not me.
But it's interesting, but you also like contrasted with that, you get this like bickering. They're bickering with each other.
Right. You can tell that they know each other somehow really well, and they got this.
And so
for allies, they don't seem to be in the same book, let alone on the same page.
Right, they're not on the same page, right? And since they're not on the same page, it's like, it's not that necessarily suggests incompetence, but it is an interesting contrast with that like really truly scary imagery and that scary looking character doing these really horrible things, and then them bickering between each other. It makes it even more like grotesque somehow.
And what we don't know throughout these first two issues is why the tarantula is doing this to poor Catherine. Like, we get that they want information. They're trying to get information from her about somebody, and you don't know what in the world they're going on about.
They give you a really good clue, because in their bickering, she's insisting, like, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. The woman in the veil makes a remark about how she has to know something. I know how he gets basically like in when he's like in his glow. I forget the exact phrasing she used, basically
After
describing him
love.
post-coitally.
After
And
love
he
is what she
apparently
says.
gets loose-lipped when he is in that state. And so you're like, oh, that's interesting. You know, that's definitely, I think, one of the bigger clues they give you early on.
Another thing you connect to is like before when when Diane and Catherine are in the taxi together, Catherine's like, hey, I kind of got a fella right now. It's like, who? And she's like, well, I'm not going to say who, but it's like, somebody connected. Oh, really? It's like, yeah, but we're just having a good time. We're not fucking, it's not going to last forever. We both know what's up. And then later when she's being tortured, she's like, he doesn't tell me things like that. I'm just a good time girl. So you can connect that, like, they want information about the person.
That person.
That she's dating from the old off the floor crowd, as it's called in the book. So you put that together, and then you put the thing with the veiled lady together, and it seemed you can draw a line. You can draw a line.
Won't be the first, won't be the last in a long line of women, fictional women, and real women, who think dating a gangster will be fun and exciting. Rather than what it actually probably will be, which is just
to be fair, sometimes it is.
And sometimes Joe Pantaleone beat to death in a parking lot. I really do genuinely like these books a lot. I think they're great. I would recommend people read them, but early on, thankfully they refer to each other by name a lot, because early on, the way that the faces are drawn, I was having a little trouble telling different characters apart.
There's a lot of characters here. I mean, you have to try and, figure out who they are. I was on the same boat with you. I mean, it was hard for me to keep track of who was who.
Actually using the little magnifying tool in my comic book reader at one point, because I was like, who is this guy? Especially, there's a lot of there's cops, and there's a retired judge, and there's this district attorney guy, and there's all these mobster guys, and it's all a bunch of like guys in hats.
Yeah.
And I'm like, which guy in a hat is this?
And a brown suit and a tie.
Well, men wore hats like gentlemen then.
Have to figure it out by context. I also want to talk a little bit about Wesley Dodds, just as a person, just as apart from being the Sandman, and I found him to be a really intriguing character. I think much like Diane, if he was somebody that I met at a party, I would be very interested to talk more to this guy, because he kind of just seems like a little weirdo, like in a good way. Or like, this is the guy who, well, like Joe DiMaggio is being Joe DiMaggio, he's writing like snidey little poems about the people at this party, and you're like, this is clearly the guy you want to sit next to. It's like the line in Steel Magnolias when she's like, honey, if you don't have anything nice to say, come sit by me. You're going to go sit next to Wesley Dodds' party, I think, just to hear the things he's going to say about these people.
Yeah, he seems like very well educated, in my opinion. I mean, he definitely pulls that off. He seems also kind of tortured. Anytime that you see him outside of being the Sandman, of course, he's been up all night doing Sandman shit. And somebody will run into him and be like, his eyes are all bloodshot, and he's been up all night. And it just seems like there's a bit of, he's haunted by them visions as well, by the visions that he keeps seeing as he goes to sleep. Definitely got a different view of the world than a lot of other people would probably have, in my opinion. And that makes him unique. So.
I mean, I think his dreams, force him to engage in activities that, like, I don't know, the right word is it that he would rather not, but like, what he laments about it is the force aspect. Like, he is compelled to act on these things. That's why he's trying to solve this crime in particular. Lots of goddamn crime in New York City to solve. You can walk around for a little bit. You don't have to look very far to find somebody that should get goddamn gas gunned. But, like, this is what he has to do. I like how both good and bad he is at, like, breaking into places. He gets into places and he gets out right as he's getting caught. And then later you see him, like, learn. Because, on the job, where like later he's like, I ought to set a trap so if somebody comes around this corner, then I'll hear him and I can go. Because like the DA catches him, he gets caught in the bathroom. The one guy catches him and like hits him in the back of the head, so he gets bloodied up. I mean, which he has to hide from Diane when she comes to see him at like, I think it's in issue 3 at like 3 a.m.
Yeah.
But like, it's great to see these first steps. It's almost like you're getting to watch him grow as the Sandman, and so you're growing with the character. I think he's a great character, and I think that I think it's cool that he's a little pudgy. They wanted that, and it works. It's like this guy, if you're not careful, will come across like Batman. He's a rich guy. He's got a butler. He has gadgets. He has a gadgeted up car. He's really smart. He's always like aloof. Green Arrow in his nascent days, early days, it's Batman with a bow. He has an arrow car and an arrow cave and a sidekick, and he's a rich guy. You know what I mean? If you're not careful, this could have gone the same way. And they take great pains to make this guy a different kind of rich bachelor, super eccentric superhero than Batman. And I think it's pulled off very, very well.
I called him a dweeb a couple of times in a way I think offended Dee a little bit.
I don't think
it was said with love, I think he was a very dweeby in a very likable way. I mean, this is a guy who's folding little origami things to put on, and he's telling Diane not origami. I learned it in Japan,
I'm really surprised that people weren't figuring stuff out because he was leaving that at the scene, and I don't think too many people.
He's freely handing out origami in both personas. He's very anti-slick because he'll do these slick things where Diane and her father are coming out of their house and he's just there to give him a ride. You want a ride, guys? And people notice him not being slick, but it still works. He still gets away with it.
He's a weirdo rich dude, number one. Also, number two, the cops that are on the case aren't the most socially aware guys. We see them engage in torture. One of them uses the N-word, which we'll talk about in a little bit, I'm sure. So you know what the most important thing to them on this origami is? There's a note. They would never think that this being folded up was a clue. They're, oh shit, what the Sandman write? They would unfold it. And they don't travel in the same circles as Dodd. Now their connection is the DA guy maybe, but so the people who should be able to make the connection won't. In my opinion, I get what y'all are saying. I don't disagree, but I just don't think this cop is not the kind of he's beating somebody with a fucking rubber hose. I don't think he's the kind of guy origami. That's Japanese.
Here's the thing.
Folding art. How's this getting over there? What's this? Find some people who have been in Japan. I just don't think that guy. At one point, he forgets to look and see. They're like, oh, so it was this milk company? Yeah, who gives a shit? Well, it shut down 4 years ago, man. Maybe we should check it out. What was this truck doing out here? So I just don't think that these are the Keystone fucking cops to an extent with police brutality. You're talking about the Law and Order Special Vigilantes Unit. They ain't. That's not who they are.
No, that is not. But at the same time, he's handing Diane origami, and her dad is a district attorney. It is not out of the realm of possibility. Her dad will be like, oh, he's leaving origami on these bodies.
I said that was the link, but I don't even know if those guys would write they would probably write in their report weird ass folding note.
they
you know what I mean? I'm gonna give this one to them until I think. Listen, it goes 70 issues, and spoiler, at some point, she absolutely knows he is.
I know.
Wesley Dodds. I'm sure that comes into play when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't go and leave your calling card around for when you're not supposed to be leaving your calling card around.
Yeah, the Riddler's a lot better at this because he doesn't care who. I don't give a shit who knows who the fuck I am. I'm Edward fucking Nigma. Look at this, you idiots. You can't even solve this riddle.
Oh man,
you can't do it around a dame who's sharp as a tack and twice as brassy.
That's right.
Have y'all ever seen the Thin Man?
No, yeah. I've never seen it.
With I can't remember his guy, but Myrna Loy's the lady, and they're together. I think they're husband wife, and they have adventures together. This is kind of their relationship here is kind of similar to them, but in a much darker and much more erudite vibe.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
When I see that, they remind me. So you've seen the Thin Man, Emily?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay, good. Myrna Loy looking good too.
You've got a brassy broad, and they're bouncing off each other.
Right.
It's very. I know I've asked you to watch it with me. Did we ever watch the Hudsucker Proxy?
I've been very busy.
It's very that, though. It's very that. Jennifer Jason Leigh is a reporter, and she's very I'm gonna get the big scoop, and she's,
These, like I said, they're more erudite, but their banter's kind of similar, but the vibe is obviously more sordid because New York 1938 Vertigo DC Comics.
Vertigo DC
Sandman
Comics.
Mystery.
All right.
Act 3 and 4.
That's right, 3 and 4. The mystery deepens as we begin to see signs of these crimes pointing to Albert Goldman, a criminal that law enforcement has had their eye on for a little while. We get a closer look at Albert Goldman and his family, his alcoholic wife Miriam, his incestuous relationship with his daughter Celia, and his disappointing son Roger. As Sandman continues to investigate, a step ahead of the police, Diane continues to dig as well, hoping for clues to find her friend Catherine. By the end of issue 3, Albert's daughter Celia is the next kidnapping victim, taken by the Tarantula. Signs are now pointing the police to Albert's son Roger. And when the Sandman arrives at the Tarantula's lair, he is able to stop the veiled figure from killing Catherine, while the hooded figure looks to kill the Sandman, but ends up electrocuted by some exposed wires. So just kind of paint the scene there. Sandman shows up, and it turns out there's two people. We were talking about the veiled figure from earlier, and the hooded person that we were probably referring to as the Tarantula is there. So now the Tarantula, the hooded figure's dead. Now, when the tale finally reaches its conclusion, we see that the veiled person is actually Celia's mother, Miriam, and the hooded figure was indeed Roger. Their motivation? Revenge. The pair knew that Albert was funneling the fortune to Celia, and the two would be left with nothing. And that are issues 3 and 4 of Sandman Mystery Theatre. This is a really good mystery. It had you on the hook. You didn't know. I mean, there were clues laid, and if you went back and read it a second time like I did, you could see, especially my favorite part was the end of issue 2. You see him with this fire poker. It looks like just a big metal bar with some spikes on the end of it. And the Tarantula is pointing it at this other girl, saying that he's going to beat her to death in front of Catherine in order to get some information. And then you see that same thing in Albert's hands as he's poking the fire at his house. Oh, it's Albert. It's got to be Albert, right? But then you find out, like, shortly after that, it's not Albert because he has no idea where Catherine's at. He's on the phone with somebody asking for Catherine, and it turns out, oh, yeah, that's right, she's disappeared. So it's not him. It's a good mystery. I mean, I'm on the hook the whole time throughout this thing.
Well, this shit gets dark.
Yeah, it does.
It's real dark, first of all. Even beyond the story itself, like, I thought the mystery is good, the story is good, but, like, I really was ready for more of these characters at the end, too. Like, I think they did a great job building this whole world. It felt very lived in. You felt like you were in New York City. I was ready to go on the next adventure with the Sandman, to see Diane figure out more and more, that's who this guy is. So I think that's probably the greatest compliment that I could pay it, as Dean told me. He's like, oh, that's the best compliment you could pay, saying you wanted to read more.
I don't want this to sound too creepy or whatever, or terrible, but, like, it is sick and twisted and well done when, like, Celia starts to turn things on. Like, she's abused as a kid, sexually abused, but now she's running the show. She got her dad to do whatever because, he kept this secret, and also apparently sickly, he just, likes it and everything. And when she has sex with him and that look on his face, it is grotesque. It is like, it is incredibly like you can tell that he is enjoying it, but you can tell he shouldn't be in the same drawing. It's why it's really wild. I'm glad that, like, they decide not to kill I'm sorry that the other ladies die, but I'm glad they decide not to kill Catherine. She is in a bad way, though, with her rib all bad and her wrists. Apparently. Yeah. She was, like, chained up for, like, a week or what the fuck ever. So who knows if her wrists will ever heal properly at the time, because medicine's ain't what it is now. I also enjoy how, like, apparently he Sandman uses the gas in different ways. Like, he can use it to knock out a dog, or, he uses it to knock out Miriam, and it doesn't work as well because, like, she drinks so much, she's used to sedatives. And I think, and then, like, she goes after him, right? with the axe and everything. And like the axe is she's old, so that's a bad weapon for her. What she should have had was like the knife, like the guy from Madison Square Garden.
That made it here.
Carnage coming, because that's a smaller weapon. She might have been able to get in there. The axe is kind of heavy. It's kind of long, you know, at least. The Madison Square Garden guy, he'd have had a knife. He knows what he's doing.
Emily, I mean, I does he do this shit around the house all the time? Does he bring that guy up? Gosh.
Here's the thing. I think he wants to keep the knife guy at Madison Square Garden bit for you. Like, I get different bits.
Okay. All right, then.
Like the wallflowers different game. I get different.
The wallflowers different?
I don't.
Okay, so like I would like somebody would be talking about something and I would act confused. Like they would be like, "Oh, baseball." I'm like softball? Like, no, baseball, throwing it overhand. I'm like, softball, like underhand and stuff. They're like, no. And I was like, so what's the difference? They're like, the difference? And I'm like, yeah, what's the difference? And they started complaining, and I would start singing, the only difference. I'm like, the difference is a song by the Wallflowers. I got you. And I did this for like a year. Like, and nobody ever got me. They would be like, oh yeah, what's the difference? Like, the difference is a song by the Wallflowers. The difference that I'm talking about right now, though, is blah, blah, blah. And like, we eventually had to quit the game because like, they got so tired of it. They got so tired of getting caught. So anyhow.
Infuriating. When he started doing it to his brother instead of me, I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. When he did it to me, it was the absolute most infuriating thing in the entire world. So I think the Madison Square Garden knife guy bit is hilarious because he doesn't do it to me. So I'm very sorry for you.
It will continue. I can look forward to that, I'm sure.
He loves it. I don't care what you say, Jesse. You love it.
You're right. You're right.
And much like the difference game, like they always fell for it. And like about a half second before like I said it, they realized what was happening. And it's too late. It's too late. It's just gonna happen. And I can see it in your eyes when we do this every time. That moment, you're like, God damn it, he did it again. How did he do this? And I'm never gonna stop. No one can stop me. Although Sandman did stop the tarantula, and good for him. Yes, so now the socialites of New York City can drink in peace again.
Yes, they can. Yes, they can.
Until the war.
You know, Roger definitely had some issues, especially after he killed like the second lady. Like he comes back up and he's talking to his mom. He's like, I don't know if I could do this. I really don't know if I could do this. Did you see her eye? Her eye. It popped out like it was bad. These two have gotten in over their heads, or at least Roger definitely feels that way. I think Miriam is too soused to even think straight most of the time.
I think Miriam is right. She's like, you love it.
I don't know.
Don't we find out he cut up a dog? He killed.
Yeah. He got kicked out of two different. He got kicked out of two different schools. One time he beat up a teacher, and the other time he cut up a dog. Yeah, he's into this. He's trying to act innocent. You know, know. Listen, he feels like completely emasculated by his father. That's why there's a scene where he goes to kill his dad and he can't do it because he's utterly emasculated. And this is how he takes it out. This is where it goes. Okay. You know, he's a bad person who was brought up by a worse person.
Yeah, and that whole family.
You see that scene then, and then you have to start to wonder, like with the other stuff, how much of this was maybe her pushing her own grotesquerie onto him. Like, how much of this was him learning at somebody else's feet?
Right.
Like, was he just naturally like psychopathic, or was this somewhat learned behavior?
Did he jump or was he pushed?
Catherine doesn't die. Celia gets taken by the two, right? At the end? I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, she doesn't get killed as far as I remember. I assume she winds up with the money.
You know what? She probably does.
I mean, honestly, like, I don't know that they're going to be able to undo, because part of the story is that they've been trying to go a little more legit. But all these gangsters are showing up again because he's kind of getting his nose dirty a little bit again. So I think she's just going to wind up with the money. That's my assumption. I can't say for certain, but that's how it feels to me.
Yeah. The other note that I had here was Sandman staying one step ahead of the cops, which was pretty cool. Like, and at one point the cops are like right on his tail, but then he unleashes like these tires with the spike strips that come out, and
caltrops, I think, is like a term as well.
Right.
You know, Sandman, he first appeared in like early 39, not 38 like I thought. I'd have to look it up, but like him and Batman around the same time, so it's neat to see, like this, basically he has his Sandmobile. I mean, I thought that was a really cool moment too. One of the things they pull off, which is really difficult in any medium, but especially in a comic book, is it's a lot like The Godfather in that, like, you watch this movie and it's really, really good, but goddamn, not a lot happens. A lot of it is just people yapping at each other. And these first 4 issues are kind of similar. Most of it is just people talking and you trying to figure out what's going on and who the relationships are from the talking. But when it hits hard, like in The Godfather, it hits fucking hard.
It does.
You know what I mean? And that's what happens here. You get a car chase, big fight. You get him like just fucking talking down motherfucker where he's like, yeah, she was just the mastermind. You're the one who did everything. Great lettering again. I forget who lettered this book, but they did a great job on it, making Sandman seem even more intimidating. You get really a little bit of everything here. And when you get it, it super pays off and hits hard. And that's hard to do in like a movie or a novel or anything, but especially in a comic book, which is like supposed to be a little more even between visual action and verbiage, but it works here. I can't give this any lower than like a 96.
Okay. I want to ask you here, Emily, did you know who it was before we got the big reveal? Was that something that you were able to put together yourself? Because I think there are clues here enough to where you possibly could, or were you surprised when you finally saw it?
No, I was not surprised. I think they laid enough clues down by the end. I wasn't surprised who they were. I was surprised the direction the story took. Like when I was trying to figure out their motive, I was more surprised by some of that stuff than anyone's identity, for sure.
Okay.
It was not the direction I was expecting things to take. I don't mean this in a bad way, but I think I was expecting something more, because by the end, when they've taken Delia hostage, I guess I was expecting some sort of element, like, because he's the tarantula. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
Like, is there something to do with the name? Like, why is this the persona? And also, too, like, you've got Wesley Dodds, like, or you got the Sandman, leaving these notes with the little, like, spider motifs in the poems and things. Like, I was kind of waiting for that to come into play, or for it somehow to relate back to those two characters who we end up finding out are doing all of this. And it's not even, again, I didn't feel let down by it, but I was just like, oh, okay, that's where it's going,
It's hard for me to remember if I knew the first time I read. I read this for the first time in probably in its entirety 1997. Okay. I read the first like 2 issues. Like I said, I stole the one and I bought the next one, and then my comic book store either closed or they didn't have copies of this. I don't remember then.
Okay.
But like obviously this time I knew, what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I know how to get to the store now. I've been. This is aimed at like probably 15 to 25-year-olds. And I think if you're at the lower end of that, it's probably not super transparent, so you have fun trying to kind of figure it out. If you're at the upper end, there's not really a lot of mystery here, but the craft is great, so you don't care about anything else. You're really not looking. You want the stuff we talked about. You want that vibe, that motif, that feel. You want this to be a really good period piece, and it is. You're not so concerned. You're not so concerned with whether they fool you with the mystery or not. Also, their cast isn't big enough at this point to be able to fool you a whole lot. Like, it's not Wesley Dodds. It's not Diane Belmont. It's not the 2 cops. It's not the terrible dad guy. It's not Celia. It's not it's not the judge. Like, these things. So who's left that you've been in more than 2 panels?
Shout out to the judge, who's a great character we haven't talked a lot about.
I do love the judge. He says, my Bono's no longer pro because I retired.
Right.
I like the idea that he was trying to be a good judge and he kind of got forced to retire, and he's like, I really shouldn't have. I could still be doing some good. He's a great character, just a really fun guy, always trying to give people brandy. Like when she faints in the office or whatever, and like he's like, here, sip on this brandy slowly as she wakes up. How's that gonna wake somebody up? Here, quick, shotgun this beer so you can wake up. Hey, shoot this pure grain alcohol, this fucking Everclear, and get your head going.
It'll cure what else? Yeah.
It will. It will. I want to talk about, obviously, the one thing we've only like kind of brushed up against, and that is there is a, they use the N-word in the comic, racial epithet, like the cop guy's like, I used to have a sister, but she married a, whatever. I think this is a time of like Pulp Fiction and stuff, so they're trying to make things like this guy's not a good guy. Like I said, he tortures the accountant. That Sandman, I guess, also tortures, but it seems like he tortures him, but at least the guy, like, doesn't get beaten,
right.
Or something. But
he's
this
one of the good torturers.
The good torture, right. Well, Sandman's also like, listen, I won't hurt your dog. So that's really important to me,
I was genuinely worried about that. I was like, if he hurts this dog, me and Sandman are going to have some words.
I only want my heroes to hurt dogs that like jump on them or like attacking them. And then, shit happens. But back to the racial epithet. I think this is a time with Pulp Fiction. People were like, they were trying to write things where it's like, this is what they would have said. So I think that's what's going on here. At the same time, you could have used a different word. It would have had the same effect. I get you're trying to tell me that this guy is an asshole with no family. He's a bad person so that like when he goes after the Sandman, there's no ambiguity that you want the Sandman to win, get away, get over on. But at the same time, I just think, I don't know that was necessary. I highly recommend this, but I do want a content warning. There's some graphic stuff in here. I can't remember another racial epithet in the 4 issues. There may have been one.
Yeah, I think that was my issue with it more. It's not even because there's a very long conversation to be had about like, yeah, in art, should you make it more realistic? Is that at the expense of the person this is being affected by? Like, yeah, okay, maybe it would be more realistic if this cop in the 30s is using racial epithets. But if you're asking a young black kid to read it,
right?
Do they want to have to be seeing that over? I think there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer. I don't think people are going to have one answer to that. But I think,
because you have guys like Samuel L. Jackson who would be like, or Jamie Foxx are like, absolutely, that should be there.
Sure.
And then you have other black people who are like, nah, I don't. There's no need for that.
If it's something that deals with race, for instance, and you don't have these characters who would be using the N-word, not using it, I think maybe that's a little different. And this because it's the only time it happens in a book that doesn't really explicitly discuss race in any significant way. They only even really mention it a time or two. It does sort of stand. You're like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah, it stands out. It definitely.
Well, in their defense, it's an ongoing series, so race does come up in the 70 issues. In fact, I'm
only talking about these 4.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Though is like you're saying in these 4, this is the only time it happens. It could be leading to other things because I know it's a subject that comes up. It doesn't come up in the next story arc, but the next story arc, I think, is The Face, and it takes place in Chinatown. And there are also racial epithets in that one. But like you said, it's weird because you're like, hey, if there were more racial epithets, it would be better. That's a weird thing to say and feel, but like...
it's a stylistic choice. You were making a choice to have a certain level of, this can be a loaded term again, but like a certain level of realism.
Right. The book about Chinatown, it would almost feel weird if you didn't have these cops saying racist things about Asian people. It would almost, but again, the whole thing takes place in Chinatown. So it's also about how like racism is bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be like, boy, sure, it's great when they go in there and use those, bad anti-Asian terms, because that's a real, it's a problem we're having right now. Sadly, it's reared its ugly head again. But it is to say that it paints the other side of the people who are the bad people very, very clearly, in this. And like, if we're doing a 30s period piece, it makes a certain degree of sense. And like you said, race is central to the story, so it makes even more sense in a way. So again, I don't know exactly what happens, but I assume that should be a moment that somewhere in the 70 issues we're going to come back to. Boy, that cop is a batshit crazy piece of trash, torturing motherfucking civil liberties, violating racist.
Right.
But by God, he is getting paid a lot of overtime.
2000. Can you imagine New York City, 1938? It's like, could you give us $5 for like bread for these homeless people? Yeah. Could you approve 2,000? Was it, how many hours of overtime?
2,000. It was 2,000
hours of overtime for the cops? Yes.
That's a thumbs up.
Big approved stamp.
Right. It's like that meme. It's like Money Machine go, brrr. Sorry, Money Machine broke.
As far as my final thoughts on the 4 issues here, I was entertained. It was a great mystery, in my opinion. I think, I knew the reputation that Vertigo sort of had back then. This was for mature readers.
This ain't Stormwatch.
No, it is not. You are not going to see Fuji punch some big baddie across the room. It's not happening.
From Cyberforce ain't running through that wall at the time soon.
No, he is not. It is what I expected, and it was one of the few early Vertigo books that I've read that I've really, really enjoyed. We talked about Sandman last night, the Neil Gaiman Sandman, and I remember reading something. I think it was around 2000. I think I got something from the library, and I sat down and I read some arc of Sandman. I don't know which one it was. I enjoyed what I read, but it wasn't something where I was like, man, I've got to come back to this, because I just remember sitting there going, there's a lot of words on this page, and I am not that. I just give me some Eternal Warrior. I went back to my long box of Eternal Warrior and just started reading there.
Where's the guy with the Uzi, Neil?
I'm a simple man. I just want simple things, okay? But
give me Bebop, give me Rocksteady, 2 mutants, 4 lasers. Let's do this.
Boom.
Bebop, Rocksteady, I am rock ready.
Bebop and Rocksteady Mystery Theater.
Oh, dude, why not?
I would read that in a heartbeat.
Everyone would read that.
Why not? Wow. But so that being said,
who killed Ray Fillet?
Get on the horn, team. All the people. Let them know.
Oh man.
We'll be like, listen, it's a really good story, but Rocksteady should not have used the N-word.
Jesus Christ.
That's not the way I want that to go.
No, it would be a lot. It would just be straight up fun. That's just a little callback.
Man,
all right.
Canceled before it's even started.
Yeah, boom.
Wow.
Why did you do that? Boy.
I didn't do that. I didn't do it.
Comic book history. It didn't even get a word on the page.
I didn't do it. Rocksteady did.
Damn it, Rocksteady. Dean, you've read most of. You said you read a good portion of these, at least a fair amount.
Around 16. Yeah, I mean, out of the...
Is it worth the read?
Yeah, I plan to read it all at some point. I like what I've read. Like I said, I think Hawkman's in it later. The Blackhawks are in it. This is a period piece in the greatest way. The world is in the throes of depression and on the brink of war. There's only been electricity widespread for around 35, 45 years, but man, the world seems darker than it ever has. And you need a dark hero to take care of these dark villains in this dark time. But what will that cost this hero? And how can he help find himself? And I've read the last issue a few times, and it has a nice ending. It all wraps up really nicely. I will tell you that the characters you love in this, they do not, they're all there. Wesley, Diane, Humphreys, ride or die Humphreys. Let's get Alan Moore to write the Humphreys Alfred crossover.
Oh, woo!
Yeah. We'll get
let me ask.
We'll get Phil Jimenez to draw it.
All right then.
Let me ask you this though. So this is something that is very obvious. We've talked about it a lot, and I think for good reason. I think it's one of the stronger things about the book is it's very evocative of a very specific time. And it makes you, I don't know, I wanted to talk like that the whole time. Yeah, they've got all this really great lingo. You got all the groceries, Dame, all the great.
All the groceries. I wanted to use that.
So I had to get in there before we ended. And what do you think about it as a 90s comic book? This is something that is written in the night. Where do you see that, if at all, on those pages?
It has an historic significance as one of the first of the second wave of Vertigo books. One of the first original titles. This is not a title that came from DC to the Vertigo imprint. What Vertigo was bringing had already been somewhat successful. That realm, that part of DC's realm of dark fantasy, the Doom Patrol, Shade the Changing Man, Animal Man, etc. They had been sequestered a little bit. But was this really going to be a brand? Was this really going to be something that could spur sales? Was this really going to be something that could connect a specific audience to a specific books? Sandman Mystery Theater said not only yes, but that this audience would respond to books that were not like the original books, which made Vertigo wide open, where you would get books about magic and crime and pirates and Vikings and all kinds of stuff like that. That I don't know if Sandman Mystery Theater is not among that first wave of books. I don't know that Vertigo's the success that it is.
Now, I like your answer, but it's a meta answer. You're talking about it as a 90s book within the context of the comic book industry. I'm asking you, like, on the page, do you think there's anything about it that tells you this is a 90s, as opposed to, even if it's a 30s pastiche written in the 90s, could this have been written in the 70s? Could this have been the same comic in the 50s, in the 2000s, in the 2010s? Like,
I mean, me personally, there isn't something indicative to me that makes this a 90s comic. You could have told me, you could have handed me this book and said, hey, this was written last year. And I would have been like, oh, yeah, well, okay, yeah, I'd believe it. Because
there's nothing wrong with that answer. Like, I don't think it's a knock against, I'm just curious.
No, it's
as in the context of 90s comics books.
If you ask me what makes it a 90s book, and this is again a meta thing, and I hate to say this because it's awful, but we've read like Unity, we read like Mars Attacks Image, and like now this book, people in the 90s were like really into sex crime. People, they were really into, like, for whatever reason, like Unity and this has it in, and these aren't the only two like mainstream comics that had incest stories that weren't like cosmic weird incest stories where like eternity and infinity are brother and sister and lovers at the same time. Yeah, what the fuck ever. We're beyond anything that we can comprehend at that point, right? But like these are like people, doing incest. There's a lot of rape. There's a lot of that kind of thing. So again, it's a meta thing, but like what makes it a 90s comic? Well, we started off our ongoing series with an incest angle. So
yeah, I mean, here just on the show, and we planned this a while back. Remember, we were going to record a while back, and so I was reading it back then. But
right.
we had Unity, and then I think it was Unity, and then this, and you were like, man, I mean, we were picking the books here that have some
right. And I think that was not necessarily less taboo, but a well that you would go to for a shocking cup of water,
sure,
more often than now. I don't know that anything in there, again, it's sort of meta, but like the art style, I think up until that point, and maybe since that point, since like 2000, 2002, you couldn't get this in a mainstream comic. Like this is a DC comic. Before this, before Vertigo, like no mainstream. It would have been hard to see this anywhere but like Epic or maybe in a graphic novel. And then later it would only be something you'd see at Image. I don't know that the story itself is necessarily 90s centric. I don't know. I've never read it with that in mind. Maybe next time I read it, I'll think about that.
Sandman now, like as in this character, Wesley Dodds, is he still palling around out there doing some stuff in the DC universe?
I don't know. I know they recently brought the Justice Society back, but I've not kept up with it. So
okay.
I don't know how that's working or how that's not going to work. I know he was a Black Lantern during Darkest Night. I remember that, but like I don't know what's going on with him now.
Has he ever had any big screen appearances?
Not of which I'm aware.
Yeah, I was going to say,
think we're due for it.
I think that this would be better served. I mean, if HBO Max wasn't becoming such a shithole, this is better served as like a series. Like a mystery series that goes on. I don't know that you can get this across in a movie.
Yeah, I like the idea of a series.
It's a great comic that leads to a great ongoing series that, is utterly timeless in some of the best ways. And you're going to, like I said, you're going to notice the vibe first, but you're going to stay for the characters. You're going to stay for the interaction between Wesley and Diane and how that relationship grows and changes and evolves.
Some of the best photo covers in the business. Let's go. It's time to get out of here. Thank you, Emily, for joining us this evening. Appreciate that very much. Dean Compton, tell them all about it here, buddy. What's the Unspoken Decade?
It is a secret cranberry sauce recipe that no one has unearthed until now. And I found it in Al Capone's vault. They didn't find it when Geraldo Rivera went. I went back in. They missed it. or it's a comic book website about 90s comics that I started almost 10 years ago, which is wild to think about.
A decade of the unspoken decade. Wow.
Right. So you can find us at the unspokendecade.com. We're on Facebook. We're doing the Twitter thing. Emily's written some specific articles that she'll plug in a minute, but lots of fun to be had. You can interact with me at any of those places. I don't know why you would, but it is something you can do.
No, I think this comic is very indicative of some of the other things that I have written about for the Unspoken Decade, like the aforementioned Enigma article, which I will plug again. That was a fun one because it made no sense, which made it really easy to write about. So, so go read the article that almost drove insane. Also, the Mr. Robot article also drove me a bit to the edge. So if you want to see somebody go mad reading a comic in real time that has no ending.
Oh my.
You're shaking your head. I don't know why. There's something about that.
It's a good article. I mean,
it's a good article, but there was something about writing about that comic was harder than any other comic. It just there was something about it. I couldn't explain it if you haven't read the comic. Like there's just something about what's the company?
Techno Comics.
There's something about the vibe of that whole company that like sits with me in a way I can't explain. It's there's so many ads for Techno Comics in that comic. So even if you don't read the other ones, you learn a lot about them by the end.
Oh.
And there's just something about, like, again, it's like thinking about the Black Lodge in Twin Peaks. Like, you don't want to think about it too hard in case you end up there. There's something about the world of that comic where I'm like, if I focus on it too hard, I will somehow be in the world of Techno Comics.
Wake up.
Enslaved to this weird, evil lizard god. I don't know. I don't remember. There's a lot going on. I also think that my Bill and Ted and Punisher 2099 articles are an awful lot of fun, too. So check those ones out.
All right. Very good.
Hex for the holidays. That's some good stuff too.
Is that one of your favorites?
Yeah, I like it. I like Jonah Hex.
Listen, folks, check out the Unspoken Issues podcast in the archive. We got plenty of them there. We're at over 70, maybe even close to 80 episodes where we are talking 90s comics. I can tell you some of the stuff in the archive right now. Most likely you should be tuning in to Dean, Derry, and myself talking the Super 7. That was an Elseworlds tale that took place, and it was a two-parter, and it was magnificent. We had a great time discussing that. My good buddy Evan Bevins and Chris Armstrong joined me on Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey, and we had a heck of a discussion on that one, too. That was a lot of fun. A lot of splash pages in that thing, and there was some, my goodness, was there some violence happening in that thing? Just a little. The Source Material Comics podcast, you could check that out as well. Should be able to hear me doing a solo podcast, spend about 20 minutes talking about the Cheetah Men. All right. Yeah, there was a game called the Cheetah Men, but it was also on Action 52, which came with a comic. That's right. Yes, a Cheetah Man comic. And I dropped it all out there for about 20 minutes, and you get to hear me experience that first time reading it live. You can hear Slots, me and Mark Radlich talking Slots, and then 20 minutes at the end of that is just me and him going down a rabbit trail trying to find a movie that had a scene that didn't exist in it. A lot of fun. But hey, Slots was good too. Good book. You can hear us talk about it. That's it. I'm done. That is Emily Scott. That's Dean Compton. I'm Jesse Starcher. Thanks for joining us here on the Unspoken Issues podcast. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics, blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com and the Rattlich Broadcasting Network, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.
Let me ask you this, buddy, Jesse. You worked at KFC. What was your go-to, bro? I know you worked there. I know you had to eat something. What was your favorite thing to eat?
You have no idea how much I ate there. Oh my gosh.
Oh, I do. I worked at Hardee's for like 2 years.
Shit.
I understand.
All right,
I've
then.
eaten a lot of Hardee's. Emily's eaten a lot of Wendy's.
So I'm gonna have to say the chicken pot pie. Now,
They
I
just
worked
brought that back.
the KFC that I worked at down here in Marietta, which still in operation, everything's still good, has a buffet.
You set him up to succeed back in the 90s.
That's right. That's
Was
right.
he wearing a tie? Was he dressed for success?
Yes, I respected it.
It had a buffet. So
Right, I remember the KFC buffet.
we had access to all sorts of like stuff, bread pudding. They would put chicken livers out there sometimes, which I actually grew to like. I'd take some chicken liver and put it in some sweet and sour sauce. It was really, really good.
All right,
Fucking
goddamn catfish.
My manager would come in and grab the chicken liver to go fishing. He would take a fucking jug and he would be like, "All right, guys, I'm going fishing." Like, "All right, man,
The fish are having KFC tonight."
You use chicken livers to catch catfish. The best thing.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Right down here on the river. But yeah, man, I would have to say the chicken pot pie probably. I mean, that was a full meal. But when I worked up in Athens, like when I went to college, I would get off of work and I would let no leftover goes into the trash. It all comes with me. I go back to the dorm and I sell it to the high kids on the floor above me. All those motherfuckers were high as shit. And I walk in there and I'd be like, KFC guys, just KFC. A little, a
$1 a wing.
This is just a brief aside to this aside, but did you fish out of the Ohio River?
Did I? Oh, the Ohio and Muskingum meet down here in Marietta. So right here, yeah, we could go fishing right at the right outside of the Lafayette, which was a nice little spot. We got a dam right down here that has a lot of great fish, and I got
interesting. Well, I also grew up on the Ohio River, and we did not fish out of the river where I grew up.
Well, we didn't eat any of the fish. We would just, it's all, at least I didn't. There's no way.
I grew up a mile from a nuclear waste incinerator. We did not fish out of the river.
My mom to this day will swear that because I went swimming in this was the Muskingum, but the Ohio River was like legitimately a half a mile down where it met the Muskingum. Anyway, we had a big rope swing right down there in town, and we would just rope swing off into the river. I got a huge ass boil on my leg, and my mom swears up and down it's because I went swimming in the Muskingum. Now, everybody else, trust me, it's been in the Muskingum. They ain't coming out there with boils. But
she could be right, and she could be wrong. I mean, it's not impossible, but also like as a general rule, unless like the boils being caused by like you have a piece of metal or something in your skin, nobody really cares where it came from. Like you kind of address it like, right. It's not, there's no boil investigator, I mean, you're like, okay, there's a boil. Here's what we do. Make it hot, do this. Okay. Here's some antibiotics. That's what they do. Like,
Right.
Here's the thing. Where I'm from, people, as a general rule, like they don't fish out of the river. At least they don't eat it, and they generally don't swim in it. But we had an even scarier body of water close by that you really didn't get in or touch. Like we had this giant man-made lake called Little Blue that had like coal plant runoff going into it, and it was neon blue. It was bright neon blue.
Stay out of that.
And I once had a bit of water from it like drip onto my skin, like, splash a bit onto my skin, and that skin like peeled off.
She got the boil that you got. Yeah. Like your mom was right, Jesse. Like that's like, are you in Little Blue?
Horror movie stuff. Okay, one more quick river kid question.
Good.
River kid.
Bodies. Were there bodies? You get bodies.
I'm sure that there were plenty of people that went into the river and didn't come out.
Where I'm from, they would find about a body.
Ooh.
I guess this maybe the way that washed up right there.
That is not a common occurrence here. I'll tell you that much.
So back to the Hudson River.
Right there in New York.
Which you also do not want. Never.
I've heard the same thing. Yeah, you don't want to get into that thing.
No.
Wheeze. Unspoken Decade, cranberry sauce. What's the difference? Wallflowers. Go ahead.
Guy with the knife, Madison Square Garden. He brings cranberry sauce along so it can look like he stabbed somebody.
Well, wait.
Cranberry sauce, it's out of the can. You can't eat it that way.
We're adding one to the bingo card. Ohio River. All right.
Don't
Now you
swim,
can go.
Don't eat the fish.
Don't eat the fish. Do not eat the fish.
If you find a hand on the shore, don't pick it up.
Oh, no. Don't.
Not unless it's your hand.
If you find an origami crane, make sure there's a note on it.
Right. All right. Good one. Very, very good. Very good. Very good.
So how did you like Hunter of Prey?
As if you couldn't tell, I never read a whole lot of DC in the 90s. There was some stuff that I picked up, but I knew all about the death of Superman. I've read that, did that actually on the podcast, but I've never knew the origin of Doomsday until I read that book. I think I may have looked some stuff up online just trying to put pieces together, but for the longest time I thought, and I think this was a kind of like a prevailing theory before Hunter Prey came out, which was not too long after the death of Superman or the return of Superman. A lot of people thought it was something that Lex Luthor, I think, sent into the sky or something.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, the origin of Doomsday and how he comes to be is like one of the most brutal origins.
Pretty brutal.
Yeah, it is, dude. It is. I liked it. I thought it was a pretty good book. We had a good time talking about it. And yeah, Evan Bevins. I don't know if you've ever listened to him, but Evan is definitely he's the kind of comic book reader who, he's not enticed to the violence like I am. Image guy. I want to see swords through people's heads. I want the blood, the gore. I loved all that. He really enjoys the goofy side of comics, but to have him come on, he was like, did it have to be a baby? Did it have to be a baby?